We are going to go now to our final speaker for this brief session. I'm happy to introduce Ms. Dim Lian, who will be walking us through a personal. Yeah, you can come on. She will be walking us through a personal journey through the Asia-Pacific refugee crisis and community-driven integration in Japan. She will share her resettlement journey in Japan and her work with Robocop, showcasing how technology and community-driven initiatives empower refugees and foster socio-economic inclusion. Please, Ms. Lim. We can appreciate her.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. My name is Dim Lian, and I'm speaking to you today not only as an analyst working on refugee inclusions and refugee empowerment, but as someone who has lived the realities behind the policies, the framework, and the commitment we discuss at forum like this one. And I came from Myanmar, a war-torn country, and I belong to the Chin ethnic, my ethnic minority. And like many in Asia Pacific region, my displacement did not happen overnight. It unfolded long and slowly through fear, instabilities, and quiet realizations that returning home was no longer safe. Before arriving in Japan through third country resettlement, I spent more than a decade living as a refugee in Malaysia. During that time, I learned something that statistics often fail to capture. Displacement is not just the loss of a home. It is the constant negotiations of dignity, identity, and survival in systems that were never designed for permanence. Today, I would like to share how that experience shaped my journey, how it reflects the border challenges across the Asia-Pacific refugee context, and how community-driven and innovative approaches like those that we implement in Robocorp, my organization, can move us from survival towards sustainable inclusions. So Asia-Pacific hosts millions of refugees and displaced persons, and yet it remains one of the most under-resourced and under-recognized contexts globally. Many refugees in this region live in protracted situations without legal access to work, education, or mobilities. Formal settlements opportunities are extremely limited. Local integration pathways are almost non-existent. And humanitarian assistance, whilst life-saving, it is rarely sufficient for long-term futures. In Malaysia, where I live as a refugee, education depends largely on community schools. Employment meant informal works and very unsafe and often exploitative and unstable. And skills were abundant, but it remains invisible. And these gaps between capacity and opportunity is not unique to my experience. It is systemic. And it is precisely in this gap that innovation must occur. As I mentioned, I arrived to Japan through a resettlement program. And this resettlement program of Japan is not well known and is not talked much about. And I think we can learn a lot from this. So these slides contain a brief overview of my experience in Japan through the resettlement program. And so it started as a 5-year pilot program that began in the 2010s. And since then, Japan has accepted 30 refugees from Myanmar, essentially starting from the refugee camp in Thailand. And then in 2015, included Myanmar refugee from Malaysia. And then in 2019, the number increased from 30 to 60. From my observations, there is a shift from camp-based to urban refugee selections. And then the criteria, so the select refugee is based on like several factors that I've observed, such as family compositions. So they prioritize families with many small younger children. And then there's a perceived ability to integrate. So is there a willingness to learn the language? Is there a willingness to work? and such, and of course the health status. And when you arrive in Japan, after the initial support of 1 year, you're actually expected to become very independent in terms of economic. And of course, those who wants to further their studies, there's one of the best support program, that is the Refugee Higher Education Program, and also the Refugee Vocational Education Program, which is where UNHCR Japan partner with many universities. Yep. And so moving on, so of course there are strong supports, and so while Japan offers safety and stability and legal status, and therefore I'm deeply grateful, but integration is not automatic. There is language barriers, there is of course the job hunting process, and then there is unfamiliar workplace norms, and there is also limited recognition of your prior experience, and also social inclusion remains significant obstacles. So even with legal permission to work, meaningful employment, works that matches your skill, your aspirations remain limited and difficult to access. So for refugee, resettlement is also a beginning of a different set of challenges. And what made difference for me was not a single program or a policy, but the community. So community spaces where my experience were not reduced to vulnerabilities, community networks that recognize my skills, not just my needs, and a community-led initiative that allow refugees to contribute, to learn, and to lead. And that's what eventually led me to RoboCorp. So RoboCorp is a digital refugee-led cooperative that is based in Japan, but our members are comprising from around the world. And RoboCorp is where we are co-creating no border by integrating education, employability, and entrepreneurship. And it is an online community where refugees teach refugees how to use AI through online trainings. And then we don't stop from just training, right? We also hire refugees through remote work opportunities. And move refugees through different countries through the digital mobility pathway. It innovates complementary pathway through refugee meaningful participations and uniting tech partners in global economy for a whole society approach. And this is a cooperative model, so it's designed to build ownership and an income stability and long-term pathway. So as an analyst for advocacy and partnership, my role is to bridge this lived experience that I have with institutional engagement to ensure that what we design is grounded in reality and what we advocate for is actionable. And as we understand that the traditional way takes way too time, for me, more than a decade. And then by the time the refugee resettle to the new country or a new third country, a safe country, they have to restart their life from zero again. And most of them, they don't have the experience, they don't have the resume, for example. So with RoboCorp, we are implementing the train-to-train model, train to hire, and then hire to move, so that refugees, because they are who understand us most than if not us, right? So that's why give refugee the digital skills and the work experience, which will then lead to mobility. And what I learned through this work is that inclusion does not fail because refugees lack capacities. It fails because systems fail to adapt. A traditional integration model often assumes a linear pathway. So language first, employment later, and then training first, trust later, integration as an assimilation. But for refugee, especially the non-traditional host country, these pathways rarely work as designed. So as RoboCorp, we kind of reverse the sequence, and then we start with participations. So refugee leading the training. We start with contributions. We start with the real work supported by learning, and technology allows this. And community sustains this. So without trust, the mentorship, and the community governance, technology risks the producing the same exclusions we seek to solve. And that's why community-driven models matters. And of course, we are not alone, as we are also trying our best to expand the ecosystem together with the Japanese companies and people with refugee backgrounds and stateless background for inclusive in Japan. So refugees are creating jobs for other refugees, and refugees are playing the leading role in innovative digital inclusions. So my personal journey from displacement to resettlement to professional advocacy has taught me that refugees are not waiting to be included. They are already innovating. They are creating informal schools, tutors, mutual aid networks, businesses, and learning communities, often with very little support. And the question is not whether a refugee can contribute to innovation and economic growth. The question is whether we are willing to design systems that recognize and invest in that contributions. And at this global refugee forum, I would like to speak directly to the NGOs, the actors, the civil society the CSOs and the private sectors, leaders, foundation, and social enterprises, that your role is extremely critical. You have the flexibility to pilot new models. You can take the risks that government often cannot take. You can co-create solutions with refugees rather than for them. But this requires a shift in mindset. And for short-term projects to long-term pathway, from outcome to outputs to outcome, and from visibility to viability. So please invest in refugee inclusion, must prioritize sustainability, skill set translates to income, works that build experience, and governance model that give refugee a voice in decision makings. I stand here today because I believe that my experience was not a limitation, but an asset. And because a community created space for me to learn, to work, and to lead. And because of innovation, when grounded in dignity, can transform displacement to possibility. So let us ensure that more refugees have that chance. And as true to the Robocop slogan, updating humanity through solidarity, please share this amazing 3 exciting initiatives we have for everyone. Please share with everyone. And thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.